Hey, how's it going? And today I wanted to make a video for beginners to the verse language on not doing Hello World, but writing a basic program that covers maybe some of the most important concepts in verse to kind of just get you started quickly and not shelter you so much from what's going on under the hood. So essentially this is a very simple program. It's just a verse device and a button device. And if I come here, if we click here on the verse device, you'll see we have a choice of a number that we can put in. We can put in anywhere from 0 to 3. And that number corresponds to a movie. So here you'll see we have a list of 4 movies here. And you'll see the index number 0, 1, 2, 3. So whatever number we put in here is the movie that will print out on the screen. So right now I have it set to 1, so Predator is going to print on the screen. So if I go into the game here and I just go start game, and there's a button down here and I click on this button, you'll see if you choose 1, you like the movie Predator. And that's all there is to it. It's very simple. But there's a lot actually going on under the hood, and I didn't want to go over too much, but I wanted to go over just enough to where you could feel like you're really getting your feet wet with the language. The rest of this is just in the code. So let's jump into that and we'll talk about this. In verse we have our modules. A best practice is really to keep your modules in alphabetical order, and I find that that really is helpful. That is a best practice for style guideline. And then you have, of course, the name of this. I'm calling this simple program. We have at editable, which means that it is viewable or accessible through the editor. So if it says at editable here, whatever is beneath that, you'll see that over here. So we have an at editable for the button, for the number, and for our array of movies. Rather than having to jump back into the code to change something, I can just change it right here, which is a lot more convenient and a lot faster. So that's why we do at editable. So this is an array of strings. So we have the name of our strings here, and this is considered to be a constant. It's not a variable, it's a constant. This is a variable. If there's no VAR, then that means it's a constant. Here we have the brackets, the angle brackets means array, and then string is the value. So, and a string is just an array of characters, and that's why it says brackets character when I hover over it, because a string is really just an array of characters. And then we go equals array, and then the curly braces, and then we put in the names of our movies. And I can put them in here, or I can put them in the editor too. And if I put them in the editor, the change won't be reflected here. And so we have a button, I call it my button, and it's a button device, and that's at editable. And then we have that editable for a variable that's an integer, and we give it the value of 1. And again, we can change all of these in the editor. We don't have to change them here in the code. One thing I wanted to mention too about verse is that it's supposed to be an easy language to learn, but actually I don't think it's any easier than any other language. In fact, I think there's some languages that might be easier than verse to learn, because verse has a lot of idiosyncrasies involved with it. So as a first language, I actually think it's kind of difficult to learn. It's different how it's set up. We have this variable and we're creating it my string. So we're calling it a variable. It's called myString, and it's of string type, and I'm just calling it this string. And we need to create this variable up here, the idea of scope and what can see things. So there's a lot of things that we want to instantiate at the class level. This would be considered the class level above the on begin play here. And we have to put this variable up here, so down deep inside here at this scope, almost you could say at the local level, this can then see this, and we want to be able to change this value. So because I wouldn't be able to print this out if I didn't have this variable up here. The next thing here is that on begins play we have this, and I originally started doing this tutorial, I was just going to do a tutorial about what a function was, but then I realized, it's kind of hard to do that all by itself, and then it really doesn't make sense to have a function just all by itself, not within a context of something. Really important here this is a function in verse. And notice that it's created on the same level as the on begins play right here. And it has to be here so it can be seen. If it was at any other level, if I just came in one space, see the error that I'm going to get? So it has to be created at this same level as the on begins. And what a function does at the most simple level is it takes an input, it does something usually to that input, and then it has an output. But it doesn't have to have an input or an output. It just depends on what you're trying to do. So in this particular case, I wanted to create a function that had an input and an output, so I did this on purpose. So here we have the name of our function. I'm just calling it WordPress. I don't know why. I could call it movie title or something. And it takes in a value of an integer. So that's an integer type, data type, and I'm giving it the name I. And then there's a colon, and string is the return value. So this is going to take an integer in. I'm going to call this function with an integer. It's going to do something to it, and then it's going to output a string. So up here is where I'm actually calling this function right here. And this can be confusing as a beginner because the call is kind of buried in here. Because the whole point of calling a function a lot of times is to get something out of it. When I call a function here, like WordPress, and I'm setting it, the integer in, I'm also equally as interested in getting this string value back. When I call this function here and send in an integer, I know it's going to send me back a string. So here we can use the colon equals operator, and really I was confused about this for the longest time, and I don't know why, but really what this is it's a constant initializer. Is used for initializing local constants. So in other words, I can only do this because this is a constant. If this were a variable, if I tried to do this as a variable, see, it's not going to work. It only works with this colon equals operator, only initializes if it's a constant at the local level, and this would be considered the local level. So when I call WordPress with an integer, it's going to send me back a string, and I'm going to put it in the constant, not a variable, called return element. Once that value is in here, that string element is inside of here, then I can print it out in a string here. So this is a function, and this is the function call, and when I call it, it sends back a string here, and that string value I'm putting into this identifier called return element that I can then reference here. And it's going to contain one of these names based on the index value of the integer coming in. When I say that verse is difficult to learn, this is one of the reasons why. Verse, I don't know how you want to say it, it has a lot of fail-safes in it. It has certain things that can only be done in what's called a failure context, which means that failure is okay in verse. Something can crash in a sense, but it won't stop the program from running if it occurs within a failure context. So there's certain things that can fail, and that means that we have to give them room to fail. So I don't know what a good analogy for it would be. It's like you're letting somebody practice something almost. Like you're letting them run a play in football. And so if it doesn't work out, you can just go back to the line of scrimmage and do it again. But no harm, no foul, really. And that's kind of what this is like. It's like we're letting something happen, but if it doesn't work out, it's not going to mess up anything, and we just can go back to where we started from. That's what this is kind of about. So what that means is that when we call an array, so we have this array up here that we created called movies, right? And this is the index value for the array, right? So it's going to be a number 0, 1, 2, or 3. And so in this case, it's going to be the number 1, so it's going to call predator here, right? So, but when we call an array, because it could fail, because we don't know that there's anything in that array in that particular position, there might be no elements in here, so I could be calling an empty array. It's going to fail because it's going to come back with nothing. But in this context, within an if statement, that's okay. The failing is okay. And so all it'll do, it won't crash the program, it'll just jump out of this if statement then. That's all it'll do. but we can only call arrays from within if statements. And that's a little bit different from other programming languages. And that's a concept that you have to get your mind around because it keeps coming up all the time. So because we're calling this array here, we have to call it within an if statement. We can't just call this movies one. Like if I came up here and I typed in, let's say movies is the name of the array, right? So movies, and then I want to access an element within that array. Let's say I want to access one. You see how I'm going to get an error? And it's saying, it tells you right there. It's going to tell you, in its words, what I just told you. So that's why we got to do if statements all the time. So anyway, we call this array movies, and it's going to return, it will return because we do have something there. It's going to return the predator. And then because it's almost like a function call, it's going to send us something back. We're going to put that into element. So we're going to put the string predator into an identifier, our constant, into a constant called element. Then what we're going to do is we're going to get my string variable here, right? And we can go set my string, and we can do set because it is a variable equals element. We're setting my string here. We're changing it from this string to predator. And then because this function returns a value of string, we have to have the return here. So I could type in here return. It knows the last thing is the return. So that's the return value. So when a function has a specified output, then we have to specify down here that's the return value, and we'll get errors if we don't do that. So when we put the number 1 in here, it's going to be called, and then it's going to get predator, put it in element, then we're going to set my string here from this string to predator. We're going to return that value up here and give it to return element, and then return element is going to print out here where predator is. So there is that. And then in terms of the program flow, what we're doing here is we create this reference to my button, and there's this method called interacted with event, which means the button has been pressed. And then there's this awesome method called await. And what that does is it's just pausing the code until the button is pressed. So what's going to happen is the program's going to run on begin. It's going to call this function here. It's going to get whatever item we specified in the array. It's going to send that back. We're going to assign that to return element, and that's going to get assigned over here. But it's going to pause right here until I press the button. This isn't a lot of code. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot to take in. Let's go into the editor and try doing a different title. So let's see how this would work. So here's my array here. If I want to add another movie, so let's say I click this one, and I don't know, what's another movie? Oblivion, I think is that one, Oblivion. So I can add another element here to my list, and then let's say I want to change the number, and here's my index array values. Let's say I want to change this to, I don't know, 3, so that would be Dune. I just have to go save. I don't have to recompile. And I can go into the game now. Let me close out and then start over. And then if I go over here to the button, it should print out Dune when I hit E. Yeah. If you choose 3, you like the movie Dune. That's all I had for today. I hope you found it helpful. Take care. Have a great day. And stay tuned because I'm going to be moving into some really more advanced stuff. But I just wanted to put out kind of this basic video first.